Reviewing our framework for business analysis, we're now looking in the industry section of the framework, and we're going to begin with Porter's 5 forces and then move on to look at industry life cycles. Porter's 5 forces is a model, or a framework, that's used around the world to help understand the competitive forces that shape an industry. It was first published in the 1980s by Michael Porter, a now famous Harvard Business School professor, as a way for management teams and the analyst community to better understand risks and opportunities facing businesses. The framework uses 5 lenses. These are barriers to entry, buyers or customers and their bargaining power. Third is the threat of substitutes, followed by suppliers and their bargaining power. And finally, at the center of the model is the overall level of rivalry and competition in the industry. Barriers to entry are potential roadblocks that might prevent new competitors from entering the fray. Consider factors like the level of capital required to start a business, network effects, the need for relationships with certain producers, considerable levels of built-up IP, and things of that nature. Barriers to entry represent 2 sides of the same interesting coin. For management teams looking to enter an industry with high barriers to entry, obviously that's somewhat unattractive. But for incumbents, barriers to entry serve as protective moats. This is an important consideration for financial analysts. Big barriers to entry support higher margins for incumbents, as it's more difficult for new entrants to come in and compete. Customer bargaining power represents the leverage that buyers have over producers or sellers of services, which in turn has a direct impact on margins. When buyers have ample alternatives, it gives them bargaining power since they can move to a cheaper option or an option that's more well-suited to their needs, thus reducing a business's pricing power. This sort of dovetails with the threat of substitutes. When there are a lot of potential substitute products or services, it severely erodes pricing power. An interesting example would be Apple. There are lots of other technology companies, producers of mobile phones and tablets, laptops, and so on. But most Apple users would argue that there really aren't any true substitutes, and that it's one of a kind. As a result, this reduces buyer bargaining power and increases pricing power for Apple. Supplier bargaining power helps analysts conceptualize the level of difficulty a business might have in procuring inputs from a different vendor. If a business is wholly reliant on 1 or 2 key suppliers, that means those suppliers have considerable bargaining power over a business. It's one of the reasons supplier concentration is a big consideration for credit professionals and other financial analysts. High supplier bargaining power can put downward pressure on a firm's margins and can even impact its ability to operate at all. And finally, rivalry and competition in the industry represents the number of other players and the level of concentration. Think about it this way. In a highly concentrated industry, meaning that there are fewer players, but they're quite large, it's good to be one of those large players, since that firm should have lots of economies of scale and fewer competitors to contend with. But it's bad to be a smaller, new entrant in that industry, since management would be trying to compete against the big established players. In a more fragmented or less concentrated industry, there's more room for a business to differentiate through niche offerings or leadership in product development, allowing them to hopefully maintain some pricing power.